So today is the first show of our rebranded Next Week's Life show. We now call it the Stramaglio Show. Very creative name, I might add. And if you can say Stramaglio, I will send you a t-shirt. So I am very honored. We are very honored today to have Mike Sarraille, who was one of our keynote speakers at the Executive Connection Summit last January. And a little bit of background about Mike. He is a Navy SEAL, and he is now affiliated with, and I'm going to let him explain this, with our friends at Overwatch. And he also jumped out of an airplane at our golf tournament. So, Michael, welcome to the Stramaglio Show.
Well, thank you for having me, and congrats on the name change.
Thank you. We appreciate it. People were complaining it was hard to say next week's life compared to Stramaglio, so I thought that's an improvement. And my father, and he would appreciate it if you were here. So, Michael, just a couple of quick questions, and they should be pretty simple. And again, we're excited to have you. Can you give our audience a little bit of who Mike Sarraille is, where you came from, and what you're currently doing today?
Yes, born and raised in the Bay Area. Now live in Austin. In between that, left the Bay Area, joined the Marine Corps, was a recon Marine and a scout sniper. When the global war on terror kicked off, the Marine Corps sent me back to become back to school to become an officer. So I made the decision to switch over to the SEAL teams, and then served in the SEAL teams for an additional 15 years, ultimately 20 years of service. Retired, not knowing much about business, though being a good practitioner in the military. I decided to go get my MBA at the University of Texas, the old man on campus, as I was called, which was a great experience learning from both the instructors as well as the students around me that actually had business, private sector experience. And then went into entrepreneurship, started a number of companies, written a number of best-selling books. Recently sold my executive search firm and consulting firm to Overwatch, which you had mentioned, led by Kirk O'Fell. Number 9 leadership speaker in the world. Proud to have gotten that title or claim. Been recognized multiple years as the top 30 leadership speakers in the world. And now I am the chief talent officer of Overwatch Mission Critical, which is a data center company. In particular, we pride ourselves as being the premier labor and leadership provider to the data center industry. And why I'm excited about that is my first book was The Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. It was about hiring based off attributes and then creating a culture where people can thrive. And when everyone is thriving internally, the collective performance and leadership of the organization excels as well. And so I really cover down on the leadership, or I oversee the leadership development of our internal force. That is also external through Talent War Group, as well as run human resources, which we tend to call talent and culture, alongside just a powerhouse. His name is Bo Deason, but Kirk O'Fell has given me a great opportunity. I'm learning a lot about the data center industry. We all know that's one of the most rapidly growing industries in the United States, and that sort of brings us up to this juncture.
So, if anyone in the audience wanted to find you and visit with you about a speaking engagement, where would they find you?
One of two places. One, you could go to mikesarraille.com, or you could go to weareoverwatch.com, and you can find me both places. And love to work with companies. Just finished up working with the CEO and his leadership team for Body Armor, also Powerade, which is a Coca-Cola company. But usually when I come in and speak, it's about leadership, culture, high performing teams, and then everything it takes to create that culture that people just, again, iron sharpens iron, and people just don't want to leave. I mean, they've worked in multiple places before. They come into your respective business. The culture is strong. The culture is healthy. It's positive, and people just don't want to leave. And so helping companies either through consulting or just coming in and giving a keynote in a workshop, that's what I tend to do.
So, From our surveys after your speech, your keynote speech at the Executive Connection Summit, you came up number one. So out of all the speakers and the full agenda, we thank you and congratulate you because you came number one in our survey results. So again, thank you so much. Our audience learned a lot. So can you tell us a little bit about, everybody knows about a Navy SEAL and what that means, and it carries a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation. But the one thing that you talked about, which I thought was really intriguing, is what binds a team, what makes a team. And you talked about, the love factor, which many people might find a little unusual coming from a Navy SEAL. So, could you share with the audience a little bit more about what that means to you and what it should mean to our audience?
Well, I've got to address the first comment. If I finished one of the top, I guess, speakers at your conference, I know you strategically placed me the morning after the open bar, so I'm sure people were in a positive mood. That tends to affect surveys. So, I have a system called evolved leadership, and if you look at the word evolved, the first four letters are love spelt backwards. Leading people within a company is not much different than parenting and being a father or a mother. Now, you're not a parent of your employees, and you shouldn't try to act that way. But at the end of the day, if you ask a parent more or less what's the sole job of parenting, you'll get something along the lines of this answer. It's to raise empathetic, kind, respectful, competent human beings who are a net positive on society, contribute to society. More importantly, they have the ability to learn because you're not going to be around forever. And you teach them the resilience to get back up, learn from their mistakes, become better, and then ultimately pass those lessons learned to the next generation as you've done to them. And, as people are listening to this, the word legacy comes into play. The job of a leader is not only to drive outcomes within your respective business units, within your greater company. If not, you won't be in a job. But a commonly missed theme of leadership is outside of outcomes, you better be building a better generation, a more adaptable, a more agile, a more resilient, a more competent generation coming behind you to take the organization, whatever you do, to levels you could have never imagined. And this concept's not new. General McChrystal wrote about it in the book called Team of Teams. But that's my premise. And where love comes in is love is the highest form of leadership. Bottom line, I love men and women in the military much more than I hated the enemy. In fact, I was indifferent about the enemy. And that's no different than the workplace. I go through a very robust hiring process. I wrote a book about it to make sure that we're making statistically great hires. But that's like 1/100th of the solution. It's what you do the second you onboard them. What does your onboarding process look like? How are you setting expectations? How are you modifying behaviors to the culture that you've established for your company? Letting them know what right and wrong look like, what's expected of them, and then continually pouring into them. Leadership development within the private sector, even the military used to go out and study what the private sector was doing in terms of leadership development for their people. But the private sector has gotten away from that, except for a great few companies. Johnson & Johnson is a great example that comes to mind. They've always put a heavy precedence on a lot of leadership development and training for their people. But in a down economy, what's the first thing that companies cut? It's usually any development. And they're just trying to survive the bad times. Well, as an organization, I don't want to build an organization that just tries to survive. I want them to, and this goes to holistic adaptability, I want them to thrive in the worst of conditions. And that's what Navy SEAL training is essentially built to do. While it may look sadistic from a layman's point of view, it's not. It is a very well-designed process, and we like to say it's the longest behavioral interview in the world, close to 12 months. But by design, we push those young men through beyond their mental and physical limits because that's where true character emerges. That's where we can see the attributes that we're looking for and whether people are high or low in them. And subsequently, you know, that's where the greatest learning and growth takes place. So not only are we assessing these young men to potentially become, future Navy SEALs, we're also training them at the same time. And there is a lot of failure built into the process because we want to see people that are high in resilience, and we can help train them to be resilient, to not quit. But there's a lot of failure, and it's interesting who makes it through that training. Usually, people think the NCAA athlete or the gold medalist in swimming that show up to become a SEAL are going to be shoo-ins, and that's not often the case. They, for the first time in their lives, face a lot of failure during the process, and it's amazing how quickly they throw in the towel. Or the young first generation Korean American from LA who weighs about 140, 45, sopping wet, just won't quit. And I say that in particular because I'm talking about an individual I went through buds with. His name is Dr. Johnny Kim. And I'm a student going through SEAL training, so is he. I took a look at him and said, yeah, this kid will never make it. He was soft spoken. I thought he was passive. But that young man, Dr. Johnny Kim, became a SEAL, Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor recipient, went on to become a Harvard doctor, and is now a NASA astronaut, I think, taking off for the ISS station here within the next few months. So it's an interesting process, and you never know who's going to make it because you can't open somebody up and look inside at what makes them tick. But again, we have a process to eke out these attributes. And so we're a proponent of attribute-based hiring. I know I've sort of went off on a tangent, but that's the premise of love within the SEAL teams. And I'll say this: what people often get wrong about showing love towards an employee, what that means is, yes, you are empathetic, but what an empathetic leader truly does is holds their people to a standard and holds them accountable. So you see somebody stumble, you have empathy for them. A great leader pulls them aside and said, hey, you totally missed the mark on that. And we expect a certain bar of performance. So let's put a plan of action in place about how we're going to elevate your performance to that bar and then to exceed it. And by doing that, that's true love. I mean, you're pouring love and your attention and coaching and mentoring into that person in order to elevate them as not only a human being, but a practitioner within their respective profession.
So, Mike, I'm kind of curious. Obviously, you went through all the rigors of becoming a SEAL in your 20-year career. Um, and you were surprised by this 145-pound Navy SEAL that maybe you thought wasn't going to make it. He turns out to be far, far superior than you might have imagined. When you pull that kind of thinking into the private sector, how often are you surprised with the talent group that you're recruiting or onboarding? How has that made you a better talent assessor and implementer?
20 years of what I call a PhD in leadership and organizational culture.
Are you surprised at a difference between private sector and people who come out of the regimen that you lived?
There's a lot of things that translate from military to business. And so one of the things I hate when people put me in the category of he's a military speaker. No, I was in the military for 20 years. I've started multiple businesses. I've had a successful exit. I'm a C-suite executive in a multi-million dollar company. I had to transform. So, I will say this: we have some of the best in class leaders in the military, but it is also having a profound respect for the private sector and what people have built. I call them warriors within their respective profession. While I did 20 years in the trenches in the military, they've done their 20, 30, 40 years in the trenches of business. And I will say this, and probably the only military speaker to say it: it is much easier to lead in the military than it is the private sector. And it's by nature of the system. One, people can't quit the military. And there is a chain of command that you have to follow according to the law of the land for the military. And everyone is emotionally bought in. To become a SEAL, you go through 12 months of hell. You already have emotional buy-in. But the best private sector leaders, the best CEOs I've ever met, can run circles around our top generals because they have to operate in an environment where people can simply leave their position because someone offers them $20,000 more dollars to pick up and come over to their company. So building a culture in the private sector where people just don't want to leave, which is inevitable, same as the military, that's extremely difficult. And so there's a lot more in the design, the systems built around it, the function and implementation of cultures in the private sector, which makes it just more intricate and complex. So no, I have a fascination with the business world, and quite frankly, while a lot of business leaders read books about special operations, when we were on active duty, we were reading books about just cutting edge leaders in the industry, whether it's Patty McCord, who was the chief talent officer at Netflix, or Tracy Keogh, the chief CHRO at Hewlett Packard. Even one of our trips, and Mike, I want to share this. We in the military do a lot of leadership development. We particularly wanted to take a trip to Normandy to review the battlefield and walk in the shoes of the commanders that fought in Normandy. And this was 2012, 2013. Getting my time frame wrong. Sequestration hit, and so there was cuts in the military, and the trip seemed too extravagant. So my commanding officer, who's now a 2-star admiral, phenomenal leader, asked me, Mike, what do you think we should do in replacement of that trip? And I said, hey, let me make some calls. Again, I was born and raised in Palo Alto. Called some leaders who I knew, a guy named Matt Wilsey, and a well-known leader in Silicon Valley, Bill Campbell, who was alive at the time. He was known as the secret coach of Silicon Valley. Book written about him called the $1 Trillion Coach. He was the board of directors for Apple as well as the CEO of Intuit. And I said, hey, I need help setting up a leadership development trip for about 20 of us at a SEAL command on the East Coast. And they lined up Larry Ellison. They lined up, Sergey Brin, Mark Andreessen, and Ben Horowitz, two of the top venture capitalists in the world. Mike Moritz from Sequoia, another top VC firm. Carol Bartz, one of the first major female CEOs in Silicon Valley at Yahoo. And the list goes on. Eddie Q from Apple, and I'm forgetting Mark Benioff from Salesforce. We had a long list. 3 days of what was supposed to be a leadership exchange, and there was no leadership exchange. It was a one-way street. We're listening to guys like Mark Benioff and Larry Ellison and Mark Andreessen and Bill Campbell and Sergey Brin give us the best practices of how they run these cutting-edge organizations. And it was one of the most phenomenal leadership development trips I've ever been a part of. So it's those best practices that you can share between the two domains of military and the business world. And we do have some best practices that the private sector can learn from and integrate into their organizations to create a better culture, to get more from their people while elevating their people and the trajectory of their careers. And so, I have I'll end it with this profound fascination for anyone who's been part of or led building a company and driving revenue and business. My hat's off to you.
Well, boy, would I like to spend another hour on that story. That had to be unbelievable.
I'll say this. I would rather go on another 10 combat deployments than start another business. That's having now been in the private sector for 6 years since my retirement. That's my level of respect for the business world.
That is an incredible analogy, seriously. So if I can go back, one of the things that struck me, and I know a lot of my colleagues that were sitting in the audience at ECS, during your entire speech, you probably, or presentation, You may have spoken about the Navy SEALs maybe 10 or 15 minutes out of the 60, and everything else was really connected to, directed by, and frankly, I think your sensitivity to the audience that you had there. Is that your normal way of operation?
Yes, hey, I'm not throwing shade at other military speakers. If you remember, I told one story, and it wasn't my best moment. It was actually one of my worst moments. But the amount of learning I took from that experience, God bless, nobody was hurt or injured during the experience. Everyone has war stories, and I, when I'm with my SEAL buddies, we don't tell war stories. We're over it. It's part of our past. It's part of our DNA. But if you are a speaker that just gets up and talks about special operations, having never run a business, then very little of it's going to translate. They're just two drastically different environments. And the other thing about the military is we don't run profit centers. We run cost centers. And actually, and I know it's in the news right now, we're actually incentivized in the military that if we're given a $5 million budget, we're incentivized to spend $7 million, because if we are thrifty and only spend three, our budget will be cut to three the next year. So financial acumen is not really a core skill of a military service member coming out. And we all know your operational discipline and fiduciary responsibility with regards to finances can sink a business, or the lack thereof can sink a business real quick. So when I speak, it's everyone knows, yes, former recon Marine Scout Sniper, Navy SEAL. Now let's get to the actual substance of creating these cultures and leading people and building these high performing teams. And it's got to translate to the business world, or just quite frankly, you won't have repeatability within this industry we call keynote speaking.
So let's move a little bit along the current path that you're on. And I have two questions really. I just noticed yesterday that Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, the billionaire investor. I saw an interview with him yesterday where he made a commitment to a $70 billion data center. And that was shocking to me. I mean, to hear someone like him talk about that. So what are you thinking about the data center business today? And secondarily, how did your journey take you to Kirk O'Fell and Overwatch?
I would love to say I found Kirk, but Kirk actually found me. And I knew data centers existed. Quite frankly, I didn't care how the sausage was made. I just want my apps to work. I want the cloud accessible to store my data. But Kirk O'Fell. I think Kirk O'Fell is going to be one of the public faces for this industry. When he starts talking about data centers, stand by. It's a tirade of passion. So we have, and we are here at South by Southwest. I live in Austin. It's going on. We just held two panels. One, the fifth industrial revolution, with some of the what you could call the Henry Fords of the data center industry. Christian, I'm blanking my brain. It'll come to me. Chris Crosby, Dana. Dana, I'm forgetting names. Now I'm embarrassed. But we also had a panel called The Last Industrial Revolution, about AI, data centers, the power dilemma, fifth generation warfare, and its effects on national security. So, Kirk is a submariner, Navy veteran as well. And you've got an industry that has become the backbone. I mean, they call it the mission critical space for a reason. It has become a backbone through which our financial infrastructure, our medical infrastructure, our healthcare infrastructure, technology is all dependent upon. And there are implications given the demand for data, and especially the growth of AI and the supply that is currently available. And we will run into a demand supply issue. On top of that, there are energy or power implications. and we also had one of the leads of the Department of Energy out here for those panels, and that's going to facilitate a move to nuclear. There's no other way about it. And if you look at it, we are behind the power curve in terms of energy, with regards to China, who is building around 10 nuclear facilities a year and will outpace us from a power perspective by 2030. So it's a growing industry. It's got a 300,000 person labor shortage. Kirk is passionate, as I am, about opening up a new industry with a major labor shortage to the veterans coming out of service, who deal with some of the most advanced technology, who have this operational rigor around them, who are safety conscious. They are perfect for this industry. And so that's what we're working on. He's tasked me to create a number of initiatives to bring veterans into this workplace, as well as industry veterans who've been in it for quite a while. So Kirk, and getting to know him, literally was the magnet that pulled me into this industry. And when I see a leader, we all lead and we all follow in our lives. And sometimes, it's both. But he's a leader that pulled me in. One, I can work with a man who's got a good heart. He's got rock solid character, and he's got a vision and a passion. And nothing is going to stop this man from achieving that vision. And he runs hard. And so that was the magnetism that pulled me in, not only to sell my company to him, Talent War Group, which still exists under Overwatch, but then shortly after that, he offered me the chief talent officer. And this was an opportunity that my family couldn't pass up. It takes me away from the keynote speaking a little bit, but the one benefit of that is I'm here in Austin more with my 5-month-old and my wife. And he's got a great team, and I know I can help build and scale the team and the vision of that company. So the data center has no shortage of opportunities, and quite frankly, we need to see a major labor shift within the United States, because AI is going to eliminate people's jobs, but it's also going to create new jobs. And we've been through this many times in the history of our country. So it's a very interesting dilemma. And then naturally, there's implications on national security, which you see me on Newsmax and Fox News often talking about.
Yeah, I have seen you on both those channels, and it's incredible to listen to you either singularly or on a panel. And you touch on something that I find very nerve-wracking. You cited it yourself just here. National security obviously should be the number one thing we should all be, concerned about. And I listened to Kirk Othell when he was here at ECS the last 2 years, and he does mention nuclear and the tremendous amount of power that's required to protect the grids, to make sure that AI is, not retreating from the threats of outside competition. And where do you see that going? Is it going to be more nuclear than other?
Yes, and I don't think it's going to be. And having a conversation with Derek Gaston again, who was with DOE for 25 plus years, it's not going to be the large nuclear facilities we often think of. And again, people always think of 3 Mile Island and the tragedy that happened there. It's going to be SMR, small modular reactors. I think you're going to see SMRs spread across the nation, and that is the, I want to say it's the quick solution. It is a scalable solution rather than a 10-year build on a gigawatt level nuclear facility. And even SMRs geographically distributed through the nation can not only power data centers, they can put energy back on the grid. And so I think there are, in Oliver Stone, whether you like him or hate him, did a wonderful documentary called Nuclear Now. And I would recommend anyone who's interested in this dilemma, give it a watch. And he talked about the psychological or historical scars of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the nuclear bombs dropped, about Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and people have this fear of nuclear. And decisions were made in the 90s that really slowed that process. But if we truly want to lower carbon emissions, then nuclear is the solution. Zero carbon emissions and 24/7 renewable energy. I mean, some of those SMRs can last 80 years before they have to be decommissioned. So I think SMR, small modular reactors, are going to be the solution that you see rolled off a factory line in a timely manner and geographically dispersed across the United States to solve some of these power dilemmas.
Well, it's an incredible dilemma and certainly seems to have some reasonable answers and paths for us to follow. So, but to me, that's probably the number one challenge, I think, for America to keep our competitive edge is to be able to capture that data, move that data, and not slow down the intellectual property or the application of AI. And frankly, it just seems to be getting more and more daunting. So
In
that
China, just Mike, to expand on this a little, so we're in a race for AI dominance, and China has things like DeepSeek, which are more efficient, more effective within AI. AI, data centers, and power are just intricately linked. You can't have one without the other. And even from a national security perspective, you know, a traditional conventional war, we are so far technologically superior to China, we would win. But nobody wants that. And China doesn't want that. So traditional warfare, and this goes to the Department of Defense, which has to transform immensely. We had a great Brigadier General, Blaine Holt, retired, who's one of the foremost national security directors on one of the panels. He's a mentor of mine. When I asked him on the panel, what do we have to do within DoD? And he said, quite frankly, we almost have to burn the whole system down, because conventional warfare, even though we will maintain that capability, most wars will not be shot with bullets and tanks or missiles. It'll be conducted through fifth generation warfare. And Russia, Ukraine, China does have some advantages. And you're talking about cybersecurity. You're talking about hackers attacking our infrastructure. That's how, or using social media to engineer or push society in a certain direction, or create distrust in a enemy country or a near peer military competitor. So fifth generation is the future of warfare, and you're even seeing it. I've been 6 years retired. I'm a dinosaur now. So drone warfare has evolved so rapidly and at scale that in a lot of ways that is the future of conventional warfare. And what are drones? A lot of drones controlled by AI systems. There's still a man in the loop, but warfare is changing. And so technology, the tech sector, and having come from Palo Alto, even whether they want to recognize it or not, all technology has a dual purpose: commerce and national security. And ultimately, we don't want to use technology. Nobody does. The true profession of a warrior is to maintain peace, not seek war. So when we say peace through strength, it is being so technologically advanced and so technologically superior that our enemies would never dare attack us, and we would not dare attack them. So technology has a dual purpose. And what people tend to forget is that one of the life streams of our economy is e-commerce, which is to say the Internet of Things, which was developed by DARPA for military use, but then was commercialized. And it goes both ways. So whether you served in the military or not, but you're in the tech sector, or even driving the greatest power of our nation, which is the economy, which gives us the freedom of maneuver to affect change in the world, hopefully for the good, you play a role in national security. It's almost like politics. There's a saying: if you don't take an interest in politics, politics will assuredly take an interest in you. If you don't take an interest in national security or national defense, it'll assuredly take an interest in you and your quality of life, or the life that you're accustomed to.
So we're kind of winding down on time here. I'd like to bring you a little bit back to the Executive Connection Summit and the leadership positions or psychology or suggestions you would have for the people that were in the audience and anyone who's listening to this. So number one, what would your recommendation be to all those CEOs to be prepared for in the way they hire, recruit, and onboard in 2025 and beyond? That's the first question. What's your recommendation?
I'll say this. COVID was a game changer. In 2019, this is pre-COVID, 1,400 C-suite executives were asked what was your number one challenge. And over 90% said the ability to attract, hire, retain, and develop top talent. COVID made it worse. We saw concepts like the Great Resignation. Then you had the Great Regret, concepts of quiet quitting coming to the forefront in remote work environments. So I've dealt and worked on consulting with a number of firms, some Fortune 500s, on the difficulties they're facing with recruiting. And you've got to get innovative. One, you have to have a process. If you do not have a process behind your hiring, and that is to say, if you don't know what you're looking for in every specific role in your company, and the attributes that somebody needs to possess within that role to not only perform in that role, but to accelerate within the company, then you're behind the power curve. Additionally, I talked about the mind in human psychology is lazy by default. It seeks the path of least resistance. So some companies, I'll just use a crude example, always go and find college graduates. Well, the demographics, the generations are different. You need to identify new talent pools that you traditionally did not hunt in before. And what is the value of a bachelor's degree? Why is that necessary? Ask questions like that. Why couldn't we take a high school graduate who demonstrates all the right attributes, the drive, they're hungry, they're humble, they're smart, and train them to conduct whatever role we are hiring for within our company? Some things require certifications, some things require education. I get it. So you have to be innovative, and you got to challenge the status quo, the traditional ways that you've always hired, and come up with new means to identify different talent pools and how you can train those people to the labor requirements within your company.
Wow, I like that. That is solid. Um, so again, I have two questions. One is silly. The other one is more important. What was your takeaway from your time with us at the Executive Connection Summit?
It was, you know what? It was listening to your CEOs that were at the summit and their perspectives on the future markets and the evolution and change that they were enacting either within their companies or the overall strategy. And I just always find it fascinating. One, they've got a different perspective. They're knee deep in their industry. I love watching the critical thinking of different leaders and how they're approaching their problem sets. And what I'm looking for is just one, I call them nuggets, one nugget to take away that I could potentially, you had people within the print industry there. And while I'm not in the print industry, there is something that leader is saying that I can take and maybe mold a little and then implement as a best practice within my organization. And so it's that sharing of best practices, the way you're approaching problem sets, that I think everyone that attends ECS can walk away with at least a list of 10 things to return to their respective industries or their companies and potentially change the way they do business.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And you have been you've been the fodder for a lot of conversations post ECS. So I expect and hope that the many people we speak with will reach out to you and seek your counsel and opportunity, as well as a potential speaking engagement. So now we're going to end this with, my name is Stramaglio, you're Sarraille. And if you don't have a favorite Frank Sinatra song, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Well, I've got to say this. When I turned 13, my dad's birthday present to me was to go see Frank Sinatra in the Bay Area. And I will never forget that because I cried. But now I consider myself fortunate for having seen him before he passed. It's my way. That's an easy answer. It's my way. If my mom said it was always my way or the highway. I didn't always make things easy. So that song resonates with me. My Way by Frank Sinatra.
Well, I'm glad we could bring up a connection between you and your dad and a song. So that happens to be one of my favorites, if not the most favorite. So, Michael, thank you so very much for your time today. And to the audience, please reach out to Mike. He is an incredible speaker, a gifted entrepreneur, and now a huge asset for our friends at Overwatch. So, Michael, we thank you very much. Look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks, Mike.